submersible and its alien occupants near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947. Reports of flying saucers and alien bodies allegedly sighted in the Roswell area in 1947 have been the subject of intense domestic and international media attention. This attention has resulted in countless newspaper and magazine articles, books, a television series, a full-length motion picture, and even a film purported to be a U.S. government alien autopsy. The July 1994 Air Force report concluded that the predecessor to the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Army Air Forces, did indeed recover material near Roswell in July 1947. This 1,000-page report methodically explains that what was recovered by the Army Air Forces was not the remnants of an extraterrestrial spacecraft and its alien crew, but debris from an Army Air Forces balloon-borne research project codenamed Mogul. Records located describing research carried out under the Mogul project, most of which were never classified and publicly available, were collected, provided to the GAO, and published in one volume for ease of access for the general public. Mogul records, which ultimately led to the identification of the origin of the 1947 claims of flying saucer debris, describe balloon research that was never classified. Other Mogul records describing military applications of balloon-borne acoustical sensors were declassified, along with millions of pages of other unrelated executive branch documents by Executive Order 11652, issued March 6, 1972, by President Richard M. Nixon. Although Mogul components clearly accounted for the claims of flying saucer debris recovered in 1947, lingering questions remain concerning anecdotal accounts that included descriptions of alien bodies. The issue of bodies was not discussed extensively in the 1994 report because there were not any bodies connected with events that occurred in 1947. The extensive Secretary of the Air Force directed search of Army Air Forces and U.S. Air Force records from 1947 did not yield information that even suggested the 1947 Roswell events were anything other than the retrieval of the Mogul equipment. Subsequent to the 1994 report, Air Force researchers discovered information that provided a rational explanation for the alleged observations of alien bodies associated with the Roswell incident. Pursuant to the discovery, research efforts compared documented Air Force activities to the incredible claims of flying saucers, aliens, and seemingly unusual Air Force involvement. This in-depth examination revealed that these accounts, in most instances, were of actual Air Force activities but were seriously flawed in several major areas, most notably, the Air Force operations that inspired reports of bodies, in addition to being earthly in origin, did not occur in 1947. It appears that UFO proponents have failed to establish the accurate dates for these alien observations, in some instances by more than a decade, and then erroneously linked them to the actual Project Mogul debris recovery. This report discusses the results of this further research and identifies the likely sources of the claims of alien bodies. Contrary to allegations that the Air Force has engaged in a cover-up and possesses dark secrets involving the Roswell claims, some of the accounts appear to be descriptions of unclassified and widely publicized Air Force scientific achievements. Other descriptions of bodies appear to be descriptions of actual incidents in which Air Force members were killed or injured in the line of duty. The conclusions of the additional research are: Air Force activities which occurred over a period of many years have been consolidated and are now represented to have occurred in 2 or 3 days in July 1947. Aliens observed in the New Mexico desert were probably anthropomorphic test dummies that were carried aloft by U.S. Air Force high-altitude balloons for scientific research. The unusual military activities in the New Mexico desert recovery operations. The reports of military units that always seem to arrive shortly after the crash of a flying saucer to retrieve the saucer and crew were actually accurate descriptions of Air Force personnel engaged in anthropomorphic dummy recovery operations. Claims of bodies at the Roswell Army Airfield Hospital were most likely a combination of 2 separate incidents. One, a 1956 KC-97 aircraft accident in which 11 Air Force members lost their lives, and 2, a 1959 manned balloon mishap in which 2 Air Force pilots were injured. This report is based on thoroughly documented research supported by official records, technical reports, film footage, photographs, and interviews with individuals who were involved in these events. End of Section 0. Recording by Aaron Bennett. Section 1 of the Roswell Report, Case Closed, by James McAndrew. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Aaron Bennett. The Roswell Report, Case Closed, by James McAndrew. Flying saucer crashes and alien bodies, the crash sites, scenarios, and research methods. Section 1. Flying saucer crashes and alien bodies. The most puzzling and intriguing element of the complex series of events now known as the Roswell incident are the alleged sightings of alien bodies. The bodies turned what, for many years, was just another flying saucer story into what many UFO proponents claim is the best case for extraterrestrial visitation of Earth. The importance of bodies and the assumptions made as to their origin is illustrated in a passage from a popular Roswell book. Crashed saucers are one thing, and could well turn out to be futuristic American or even foreign aircraft or missiles, but alien bodies are another matter entirely, and hardly subject to misinterpretation. The 1994 Air Force report determined that Project Mogul was responsible for the 1947 events. Mogul was an experimental attempt to acoustically detect suspected Soviet nuclear weapon explosions and ballistic missile launches. Mogul utilized acoustical sensors, radar reflecting targets, and other devices attached to a train of weather balloons over 600 feet long. Claims that the U.S. Army Air Forces recovered a flying disc in 1947 were based primarily on the lack of identification of the radar targets, an element of weather equipment used on the long Mogul balloon train. The oddly constructed radar targets were found by a New Mexico rancher during the height of the first U.S. flying saucer wave in 1947. The rancher brought the remnants of the balloons and radar targets to the local sheriff after he allegedly learned of the broadcast reports of flying discs. However, following some initial confusion at Roswell Army Airfield, the flying disc was soon identified by Army Air Forces officials as a standard radar target. From 1947 until the late 1970s, the Roswell incident was essentially a non-story. The reports that existed contain only descriptions of mundane materials that originated from the Project Mogul balloon train: tinfoil, paper, tape, rubber, and sticks. The first claim of bodies appeared in the late 1970s, with additional claims made during the 1980s and 1990s. These claims were usually based on anecdotal accounts of second- and third-hand witnesses collected by UFO proponents as much as 40 years after the alleged incident. The same anecdotal accounts that referred to bodies also described massive field operations conducted by the U.S. military to recover crash debris from a supposed extraterrestrial spaceship, a technique used by some UFO authors to collect anecdotal corroboration for their theories was to solicit cooperating witnesses through newspaper announcements. For example, one such solicitation appeared in the Socorro, New Mexico Defensor Chieftain on November 4, 1992, on behalf of Don Berliner and Stanton T. Friedman, the authors of the book Crash at Corona. This request solicited persons to provide information about the supposed crashes of alien spacecraft in the Socorro area. Footnote: Socorro, New Mexico is situated at the northwest boundary of White Sands Missile Range, the largest military test range in the United States. Since the 1940s, White Sands and the surrounding areas of New Mexico have been the site of a high volume of military test and evaluation activity, including the launch and recovery of anthropomorphic dummies carried aloft by high-altitude balloons. In response to the newspaper announcement, two scientists central to the actual explanation of the Roswell events, Professor Charles B. Moore, a former U.S. Army Air Force's contract engineer, and Bernard D. Gildenberg, retired Holloman Air Force Base Balloon Branch Physical Science Administrator and meteorologist, came forward with pertinent information. According to Moore and Gildenberg, when they met with the authors, their explanations that some of the Air Force projects they participated in were most likely responsible for the incident, they were summarily dismissed. The authors even went so far as to suggest that these distinguished scientists were participants in a multifaceted government cover-up to conceal the truth about the Roswell incident. Since many of the Roswell accounts and allegations were collected by irregular methods and are not specifically documented, the series of events, as alleged by UFO theorists, has become very complex and requires clarification. Therefore, the following section will briefly examine some of the more confusing elements of the Roswell stories, specifically the multiple crash sites and complex scenarios, in order to facilitate an objective analysis of actual events. Section 1.1. The Crash Methods. The crash sites. From 1947 until the late 1970s, the Roswell incident was confined to one alleged crash site. This site, located on the Foster Ranch approximately 75 miles northwest of the city of Roswell, was the actual landing site of a Project Mogul balloon train in June 1947. The Mogul landing site is referred to in popular Roswell literature as the debris field. In the 1970s, the 1980s, and throughout the 1990s, additional witnesses came forward with claims and descriptions of two other alleged crash sites. One of these sites was supposedly north of Roswell. The other site was alleged to have been approximately 175 miles northwest of Roswell in an area of New Mexico known as the San Augustine Plains. What distinguished the two crash sites from the original debris field were accounts of alien bodies. The scenarios. UFO enthusiasts have attempted to explain the obvious contradiction of multiple impact sites involving only one alien aircraft through the introduction of complicated scenarios. These scenarios have become increasingly convoluted since the proponents of each crash site must make allowances to have their flying saucer at the correct time and place, the actual Mogul balloon train landing site in early July 1947, in order to fit with the rest of the story. The actual Project Mogul landing site, 75 miles northwest of Roswell, lends credibility and, more importantly, establishes a time frame for the other accounts that include reports of bodies. Flying saucer enthusiasts use the documented presence of U.S. Army Air Forces personnel at the Mogul site in July 1947, who were there to retrieve the Mogul balloon train, to provide the nucleus of unrelated and much later accounts that include reports of bodies. It must be emphasized that the claims of bodies only became part of the Roswell incident after 1978, when they were erroneously linked to the July 1947 retrieval of Project Mogul components. In general, Roswell incident scenarios claim that a disabled alien craft momentarily touched down at the site 75 miles northwest of Roswell, leaving behind parts of the spaceship, material that has been subsequently identified as components of a Mogul balloon train, to create the original debris field. The scenarios further